Rome, the empire that outgrew its own system. In 44 BCE, inside the Roman Senate, a political crisis reached its breaking point. Julius Caesar, recently declared dictator for life, was surrounded by senators who feared that the Roman Republic was being replaced by one-man rule. He was assassinated by a group of political elites who believed they were restoring the Republic. Instead, the assassination triggered a new series of civil wars. Within a generation, the Republic would collapse completely and be replaced by an imperial system. Within the next 4 centuries, that system would expand across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, reaching a population of more than 60 million people. And then, in the West, it would fall. The history of Rome is not only the story of conquest. It is the story of how a political system built for a city-state attempted to govern a vast empire, and how that mismatch shaped every stage of its development. Chapter 1. Geography and the early formation of Rome, circa 1000 BCE to 509 BCE. Rome developed in the region of Latium in central Italy, along the Tiber River. The location was not the most fertile in the Mediterranean, but it offered several strategic advantages. The Tiber allowed access to trade routes, while the inland position provided protection from coastal raids. The surrounding hills created natural defensive positions. These factors made the area suitable for small settlements, but not immediately dominant. By the 8th century BCE, archaeological evidence shows that multiple villages existed on these hills, particularly the Palatine. Over time, these villages merged into a larger urban center. Roman tradition later described this process through the story of Romulus, who was said to have founded the city in 753 BCE. While the story is not historically verified, it reflects the importance Romans placed on conflict and authority in their origin narrative. During this early period, Rome was influenced heavily by the Etruscans to the north. The Etruscans introduced urban planning, religious systems, and infrastructure development. Major projects such as the Cloaca Maxima drainage system allowed Rome to expand into low-lying areas and develop a central forum. The Roman kingdom, traditionally described as being ruled by 7 kings, combined religious authority with military leadership. However, power was not absolute. Elite families maintained influence, and tensions between the monarchy and aristocracy grew over time. By the late 6th century BCE, the last king, Tarquin the Proud, was overthrown. This marked the end of monarchy and the beginning of the Roman Republic. Chapter 2. The Roman Republic and expansion across Italy, 509 to 264 BCE. The Roman Republic was established as a system to prevent the concentration of power in one individual. Instead of a king, Rome was governed by elected officials and advisory bodies. Executive authority was held by 2 consuls, elected annually. Each consul had the power to command armies and enforce laws, but each could veto the other. The Senate, composed of elite families, controlled foreign policy, finances, and long-term decisions. Popular assemblies allowed citizens to vote, although wealthier citizens had greater influence in the voting structure. During this period, Rome expanded across the Italian peninsula through a combination of warfare and alliances. Conflicts with neighboring groups, such as the Latins, Etruscans, and Samnites, were frequent. The Samnite Wars, fought in the 4th and early 3rd centuries BCE, were particularly significant. The Samnites controlled mountainous regions that were difficult to conquer. Rome adapted its military tactics to deal with this terrain, developing more flexible formations. Rome's expansion strategy differed from simple conquest. Defeated communities were often integrated into the Roman system through alliances or partial citizenship. By 264 BCE, Rome had established dominance over most of Italy, controlling a network of allied states and territories. Chapter 3. The Punic Wars and Mediterranean Expansion, 264 to 146 BCE. Rome's expansion beyond Italy began with conflict against Carthage, a powerful maritime state based in North Africa. The First Punic War, 264 to 241 BCE, focused on control of Sicily. Rome, initially lacking naval experience, built a fleet and adapted its tactics. After a long conflict, Rome defeated Carthage and gained its first overseas territory. The Second Punic War, 218 to 201 BCE, posed a greater threat. Hannibal, the Carthaginian general, invaded Italy by crossing the Alps. He won major battles, including Cannae in 216 BCE, where Roman forces suffered heavy losses. Despite these defeats, Rome did not surrender. It avoided direct confrontation and focused on long-term attrition. Roman forces eventually moved the war to North Africa, where Hannibal was defeated at the Battle of Zama. The Third Punic War, 149 to 146 BCE, ended with the complete destruction of Carthage. During the same period, Rome expanded eastward into Greece and Asia Minor. By 146 BCE, Rome was the dominant power in the Mediterranean. However, this expansion brought significant changes to Roman society. Chapter 4. Economic Transformation and Social Crisis. The wealth gained from conquest had major consequences. Large estates, known as latifundia, were established by wealthy elites. These estates relied on slave labor, which became widely available through war. Small farmers, who had traditionally supported the Republic, struggled to compete and were often forced off their land. Many of these displaced farmers moved to Rome, increasing the urban population. Without stable employment, they became dependent on state support, including grain distributions. This shift weakened the traditional social structure of the Republic. The gap between rich and poor widened, and economic inequality became a central issue. At the same time, the military system began to change, setting the stage for further instability. Chapter 5. Reform, Violence, and the Collapse of the Republic, 133 to 27 BCE. By the late 2nd century BCE, the Roman Republic was facing internal problems that were directly linked to its expansion. The first major attempt to address these issues came from Tiberius Gracchus in 133 BCE. As a tribune, he proposed land reforms that aimed to redistribute public land to poorer citizens. The objective was to restore the class of small landowners who had traditionally supported the Roman army. The proposal directly threatened the interests of the elite, who controlled large estates. Instead of resolving the issue through political compromise, members of the Senate used violence. Tiberius Gracchus was killed, along with many of his supporters. This marked one of the first major instances of organized political violence within Rome. A decade later, Gaius Gracchus attempted broader reforms, including changes to the grain supply and legal system. His efforts also ended in violence, reinforcing a new pattern in Roman politics. Disputes were increasingly resolved by force rather than negotiation. At the same time, military reforms were changing the structure of Roman power. Gaius Marius introduced a system that allowed landless citizens to join the army. The state provided equipment, and soldiers began to rely on their commanders for pay and rewards. This transformed the army from a civic duty into a professional force. The consequences were long-term. Soldiers became loyal to their generals rather than to the Republic. This shift became clear during the conflict between Marius and Lucius Cornelius Sulla. In 88 BCE, Sulla marched his army on Rome, something that had never been done before. He seized control of the government and initiated purges against his enemies. Although Sulla eventually stepped down, he established a precedent. Military force could be used to control political power. This precedent shaped the next phase of Roman history. By the mid-1st century BCE, power was increasingly concentrated in the hands of a few individuals, including Julius Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus. Caesar's campaigns in Gaul expanded Roman territory and increased his influence. When ordered to return to Rome without his army, he refused. In 49 BCE, he crossed the Rubicon River, initiating a civil war. Caesar's victory allowed him to consolidate power. He introduced reforms, reorganized the calendar, and was declared dictator for life. However, his accumulation of authority raised concerns among the political elite. In 44 BCE, Caesar was assassinated by a group of senators. The result was not a restoration of the Republic, but another series of civil wars. These conflicts eventually led to the rise of Octavian, later known as Augustus, who defeated his rivals and established a new political system. Chapter 6. The formation of the Roman Empire, 27 BCE to 180 CE. In 27 BCE, Augustus established a new form of government that preserved the structure of the Republic while concentrating power in the hands of a single ruler. The Senate continued to exist, and traditional offices remained, but real authority was controlled by the emperor. Augustus held command over the army, controlled key provinces, and managed state finances. This system provided stability after decades of civil war. The Roman Empire expanded further during this period. Under emperors such as Trajan, it reached its greatest territorial extent around 117 CE, including regions across Europe, North Africa, and the Near East. The empire was divided into provinces, each governed by appointed officials. These governors were responsible for maintaining order, collecting taxes, and enforcing Roman law. Infrastructure played a critical role in maintaining control. Roads connected distant regions, allowing for the movement of troops and goods. Ports facilitated trade across the Mediterranean. The Roman military became a permanent professional force. Soldiers served long terms and were stationed along the empire's frontiers, including the Rhine and Danube rivers. The period from Augustus to Marcus Aurelius is often referred to as the Pax Romana, a time of relative stability and economic growth. Trade networks expanded, cities developed, and population increased. However, this stability depended heavily on effective leadership. The system lacked a clear method for succession. Emperors were often chosen through adoption, family ties, or military support. When strong rulers were followed by weak ones, instability could emerge. Chapter 7. Crisis and Transformation. CE. After the death of Marcus Aurelius in 180 CE, the Roman Empire began to experience increasing instability. The following period saw frequent changes in leadership. Emperors were often installed and removed by the military, leading to a lack of consistent governance. Between 235 and 284 CE, the empire entered what is known as the crisis of the 3rd century. During this time, multiple emperors claimed power simultaneously, and civil wars became common. Economic problems worsened. The debasement of currency led to inflation, reducing the value of money and disrupting trade. Taxation increased to support the army, placing additional strain on the population. External threats also intensified. Groups such as the Goths and Alemanni attacked the empire's borders, while the Sasanian Empire challenged Roman control in the east. The empire was not destroyed during this period, but its stability was severely weakened. Chapter 8: Reform, Division, and the Shift to the East, 284 to 395 CE. In response to the crisis, Diocletian introduced major reforms. He reorganized the empire into smaller administrative units and established the Tetrarchy, a system with 4 rulers. This was intended to improve governance and create a more stable succession system. The military was restructured and the bureaucracy expanded. Following Diocletian, Constantine the Great further transformed the empire. He legalized Christianity and established a new capital at Constantinople. This shift moved the center of power eastward, where economic conditions were stronger and cities were more developed. By the late 4th century, the empire was effectively divided into eastern and western regions. Chapter 9: The Fall of the Western Roman Empire, 395 to 476 CE. After the division of the empire, the western regions faced increasing challenges. Economic resources were limited, and the government struggled to maintain control over distant territories. The army relied more heavily on external groups, known as foederati, who were allowed to settle within the empire in exchange for military service. These groups gained influence over time. In 410 CE, Rome was sacked by the Visigoths. In 455 CE, it was sacked again by the Vandals. These events demonstrated the declining ability of the Western Empire to defend itself. By 476 CE, the last Western Roman emperor, Romulus Augustus, was deposed by Odoacer, a Germanic leader. This event is traditionally considered the end of the Western Roman Empire. The fall of the Western Roman Empire did not end Roman influence. The Eastern Roman Empire continued for centuries, preserving Roman law, administration, and culture. Many aspects of Roman civilization influenced later European states, including legal systems, governance, and infrastructure. Rome's history shows how a political system can evolve, expand, and eventually struggle to manage the scale it creates. It was not a single event that ended Rome. It was a long process, shaped by internal change, external pressure, and the limits of its own structure. The legacy of Rome remained, even after its political system in the West disappeared.